Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. This isn't really a lore channel, but I do think that we do need to address some of the issues that were raised by the Helminth Chair promotion at TennoCon 2020. Specifically that this basically seems to be proof that the Tenno are absolutely, undeniably evil. And I know the word evil has a lot of different connotations, and that it can be interpreted differently, but I think that what the evidence shows is that no matter how you define it, they probably fit the bill. Now, to start with, as a mechanic and game design perspective, the Helminth Chair that they promoted at 2020, it offers players the opportunity to sacrifice a Warframe to gain one of its abilities that we can then slot into other Warframe abilities. And from a mechanical and game design perspective, that's brilliant and exciting, and I don't think any content creator is at all denying that. Obviously, some have reservations and speculate that this might not be well integrated, or that it could lead to large amounts of power creep or things of that nature. But largely on the whole, most people seem to think that it's going to offer a lot of replayability for the game, and also enhance the game loop, and just make a better experience for players to give them more options and customization, which I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I think everybody's pretty much on board with that perspective. Everybody's hopeful that DE handles the implementation very well. And yeah, so I'm not going to really address the game design and mechanical perspective of this. I think that there's plenty of people doing that. I'm going to look at this from a lore perspective and the story implications that go with that chair. The sacrifice mechanic, in short, just basically shows the Tenno are straight up evil, and I'm going to try and demonstrate that and talk about some of the arguments for and against that. So I'm going to start way back on Themisto Jupiter, and that's when we attempt to murder Alad V for his creation of Zanuka. Now, we want to bear in mind that Zanuka may or may not be some sort of level of sentient, given that it's made up of both robotics and Helminth tissue parts, and that we know that the Warframes are made from sentient beings. So there is some doubt as to whether or not this is a robot or a person, or possibly both, or some sort of hybrid. Alad V tends to refer to it as a mixture, so maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we don't have the specifics on that, but we definitely are at least trying to kill Alad V for chopping up Warframes. And so obviously it's bad when he does it. It's not cool that he's chopping up Warframes and experimenting with them for his own ends. But for us, unlike Alad V, we're not a mad scientist that's clearly mentally deranged. Not that that makes his behavior excusable, but it at least makes it understandable. We understand the Warframes. We know full well what goes on with them, and I'll address that a little bit more later. But if he's not okay to destroy these things, why are we then sticking them to a wall and letting them slowly be consumed by the Helminth strain of, the infestation? That sounds like slow murder, death camp kind of stuff, where, we're taking a look at it and going, well, sorry, Mirage, I got a new updated version of you with gold trim, and it's got a little bit more health and shields. And so, yeah, I'm just gonna, condemn you to the wall now. And I'm done with you. I know that you had some level of sentience, but I no longer have use for you as a tool of murder, because I have a better one now. I got my new upgrade. So I'm just going to let you be tortured to death on the wall, so that I can take what remains of you and then use those pieces and parts to put into my Warframe that I want to play. how is that not worse by a whole lot? Now, mind you, this kind of gets into some of the other lore in just a minute, but we know on some level these things are sentient. I know some people are saying, oh, but Umbra's the only one, and, you know, the rest are just vegetated golems. And I'm like, well, Warframes do have the ability to act independently of us, given how during the second Dream cinematic, we can see that the Warframe acts independently of the operator. We can see first that it doesn't react without the operator's touch. Then we can also see that while in this situation, for the second Dream, the operator is capable of using their void powers at a distance. However, we can notice that there is no visual of void power being used when the Warframe busts the sword in half. That's just how it is. It operates independently. That's not 100% certain. We don't know for sure that maybe the operator wasn't able to do it, you know, invisibly. That's a possibility. But it's pretty strong evidence that since there was no void energy present, like we can see every other time that we use void powers, that probably it was acting independently. We also know about a scrubbed feature, which we can't take as canon because it's not in the game, but at one point, Digital Extremes considered giving us the ability to impart the umbral sentience that Excalibur Umbra has to all of her Warframes, thereby awaking their inner sentience. And the reason this was scrapped was not because it conflicted with the story or had any sort of lore problems, but that players just found this to be pointless because it only lasted for 24 hours and wasn't, say, like a week or permanent. And it just wasn't worth grinding for, and people were kind of like, this is dumb, stop, don't give us this reward. And so they put Lua lenses in as a replacement. But at no point was the objection ever by DE that it was pulled because it didn't go with the story. So we can kind of see from their mindset that in the lead developers' minds, this is entirely and thoroughly reasonable to do this. I would say that while it's not canon, it's as close to canon as it can be when the devs are saying, this is what we're going to do with the game. Okay, you don't like it, so we won't do that. It shows what their intention is as far as the lore goes. We also know that this whole Helminth subsuming process is made worse because the Tenno aren't just, you know, selling them like we used to. We used to sell them supposedly maybe to a Warframe collector that would put them in a suit of, you know, a hall of like armor suits, you know, as a display. That's kind of cruel on its own, because if these things do have any level of awakening and sentience independent of operators, that kind of sucks. To be having life at one moment and then being abandoned and never being able to move again, just being forced to be a statue more or less for the rest of existence, that kind of sucks. I mean, we don't know that that's the case, but somebody gives us credits for selling off our old Warframes. But we're not doing that, which is cruel on its own. We are now saying specifically that this fate that we're condemning them to, it's assumedly a painful destruction at the hands of the infestation. We can see that Mag in the demonstration, she doesn't look very comfortable. She doesn't look like she's having a good time. Meaning that we also know that, you know, because of what Ballast tells us in the sacrifice quest, that, you know, we're more or less basically therapist caretakers for Warframes.
It was that somehow, from within the derelict horror, they had learned a way to see inside an ugly, broken thing and take away its pain.
And now we're basically saying, okay, this thing that's more helpless than a small child, and it depends on me for any kind of autonomy and ability to even function, I'm just going to get rid of it and condemn it to a painful 24-hour torture death to be consumed by the infestation. Um, Even if we suspect that maybe warframes are operating at an extremely diminished capacity with maybe, say, fish level intellect, where they can't really understand or process things outside of what gives them immediate survival, you can still commit animal cruelty against a fish. And I would say that if, being consumed by a flesh-eating zombie virus known as the infestation, that would probably qualify if you do that on purpose. I want to be clear here that DE chose to make this the Helminth room that consumes them, and that they are then painfully tortured for 24 hours before being consumed by the infestation. And we get to look at that for a full day to make sure that that's what we really, really want to do. They could have done this same gimmick and this mechanic in game by just giving the player an Orokin MacGuffin that shoots a laser beam and sucks the power out and puts it in another Warframe, and has a little disclaimer on the side that says no Warframes are hurt in the process of this transference and of abilities. But no, they didn't do that. They want you to know that you're condemning this Warframe to a torturous death. If that doesn't completely fit any definition of sociopathic evil, I'm not exactly sure what does. Obviously, to some people this isn't news. Tenno moral relativism has long time been in question, but I'm going to offer that there's at least some plausible deniability in those cases. For example, we can make the case that we're child soldiers that genocide millions in the name of so-called balance, which may or may not be justified. But there's at least some ambiguity there. There's the concept that if we don't preserve the balance, that things will get out of control and something will happen that's bad. Either the corpus take over, the Grineer take over, or the infestation takes over. And supposedly any of those things are bad, and we're helping maintain an eternal gridlock of those forces not becoming dominant. Obviously, there's also the notion that we're basically just mercenaries that hire ourselves out to factions for loot. That's not anything that's not completely reflected in the game. We pick which side we're going on based upon what loot they're offering us. And we also know that for Samaris, we either magically or digitally, or maybe a combination thereof, enslave sentient beings for perpetual murder parades in the form of the Sanctuary. But at least there's the notion that Samaris is using these calculations and dry runs for creating some sort of peaceful solution, as he states himself, that he's attempting to save lives in the future. And also, if we're real about it, anything that we are, hunting for the purposes of sending to the Sanctuary and creating synthesis in any way, those things might as well have been dead anyway. We would have just killed them if they had accidentally walked in front of us. So not really any additional harm done there. But with the Helminth share, there isn't any indication that we're doing this for anything other than needless personal gain. And I say needless because we can already clear all content in the game with our current abilities. We don't need to swap them out. That's unnecessary. I doubt seriously that the system will be mandatory to clear content in the future, meaning that this is entirely selfish. There's no reason to do it. There's no reason to condemn your Warframe and put it through a torturous 24-hour death so that you can absorb its powers. You don't need to. You're already a overpowered war monster that can achieve any of the goals of the balance without that. So sending a Warframe that may have some level of sentience to a torturous death is completely unnecessary. Now, I will also add that You don't have to do this as far as anybody can tell. So you do have the choice as to whether or not you want to be a monster. But at the same time, this is also being put into the ships of every single player, I suppose. I don't know that it has to be unlocked. They did say that it was going to evolve. I'm assuming that has to do with just the update happening. Obviously, if you feed it, it grows stronger and gives you more stuff, so you don't have to feed it. You don't have to feed it Warframes. But being that this is happening to literally every single player, we can assume that a fair amount of the Tenno, if not most of them, will be taking this opportunity to sacrifice their Warframes to the infestation. So with that, I would say that this whole thing, it very much reminds me of a game called Spec Ops: The Line. And I won't spoil it explicitly, but I will say that both games have, in this area, the common structure of pointing out that the player is explicitly evil. And I don't know that DE necessarily 100% intended for it to come across that way, but I don't know how we can take it any other way. I'm not sure that that was their total intention. I have to at least think it was somewhat intentional, because they very much showed a clearly uncomfortable mag in that process. And that needed to be specially custom animated to be consumed by the wall. And they made it so that you have to stare at that for 24 hours to make sure you really, really want to do it. Didn't have to work this way, but that's what they went with. So yeah, I guess please leave your questions and concerns and thoughts in the comments below, because I'm interested to hear different kinds of takes on this. Yeah, thanks. Please like and subscribe.